Nathan Hayes was the kind of man people admired but never truly knew. As the CEO of Hayes Enterprises, his reputation was built on precision, efficiency, and an unrelenting focus on success. Everything in his life was calculated, from the sharp angles of his penthouse overlooking the city to the meticulously scheduled meetings that left no room for distractions. For Nathan, emotions were obstacles and relationships were liabilities. Luxuries he had no interest in. But that carefully constructed life began to crack one rainy Tuesday morning. Nathan was in the middle of reviewing reports for a high-stakes merger, the kind of deal that could reshape his company, when the call came. He glanced at his phone, expecting another update from his legal team, but instead, the screen displayed an unfamiliar number. "This is Nathan Hayes," he answered briskly, his tone carrying the clipped authority that left no room for small talk. "Mr. Hayes, this is Lisa Carter from Social Services," a woman's voice replied. "I'm calling about a baby, a newborn named Lucas. The mother left your name as the father." Nathan froze. The words hit him like a sharp, unexpected gust of wind. His initial reaction was disbelief, followed swiftly by irritation. There had to be some mistake. He hadn't seen Amelia Scott in over a year. Not since their relationship ended on a sour note he preferred not to revisit. "I think you have the wrong person," he said coldly. But Lisa's voice remained firm. "Mr. Hayes, the mother specifically listed you. We need you to come in and discuss this matter further." As he ended the call, Nathan leaned back in his chair, staring at the city skyline outside his window. For the first time in years, he felt something he couldn't categorize: uncertainty. Nathan couldn't shake the words from his mind as he sat at his desk, staring blankly at the merger report in front of him. Lisa Carter's voice echoed in his head. "The mother left your name as the father." It didn't make sense. He hadn't seen Amelia Scott in over a year, and if she had anything to say, she would have contacted him directly. But instead, she left a child? With his name? Frustrated and restless, Nathan drove to the Social Services Center. The modest parking lot and humble exterior of the building were a stark contrast to the polished, high-rise world he inhabited. He took a deep breath, stepping inside with his usual composed, almost intimidating demeanor. The woman at the front desk glanced up as he approached. "Mr. Hayes?" she asked, her tone polite but slightly wary. "Yes," Nathan replied curtly. "I have an appointment with Lisa Carter." She nodded and motioned for him to take a seat. Nathan lowered himself onto a worn wooden chair, feeling entirely out of place in the cramped waiting area. Minutes ticked by, and just as his patience was wearing thin, a woman in her mid-30s with neatly tied brown hair appeared. "Mr. Hayes?" she asked, extending her hand. "I'm Lisa Carter. Thank you for coming." Nathan shook her hand stiffly. "I'm here to clear up a mistake. If there's been some kind of mix-up, I want it resolved immediately." Lisa gestured for him to follow her down a narrow hallway. Her tone was calm but firm as she said, "I understand your skepticism, and we've already initiated the verification process. But I think it's important for you to meet Lucas before making any decisions." Nathan opened his mouth to protest, but as Lisa pushed open the door at the end of the hall, the words caught in his throat. In the quiet room, a small baby lay curled in a crib. Lucas was tiny, wrapped in a soft blue blanket, his rosy cheeks peaceful as he slept. As Lisa moved closer, the baby stirred, opening his eyes. For a brief moment, Lucas's gaze met Nathan's, and something in that innocent, curious look froze Nathan in place. "This is Lucas," Lisa said softly. "The mother left a note explaining that you're the only person she could trust to care for him." Nathan drew a sharp breath, steadying himself. "I can't take responsibility based on someone's word. I want a DNA test. Immediately." Lisa nodded. "We've already arranged for that. But in the meantime, we're asking if you would consider caring for Lucas temporarily while we wait for the results." Nathan glanced at Lucas again, trying to suppress the unsettling pang stirring in his chest. Finally, he exhaled. "Fine, but only temporarily." Nathan wasn't entirely sure how he had agreed to this, but a few hours later, he found himself standing in the adoption room, where Lucas lay peacefully in a small crib. Lisa Carter walked over, carefully lifting the baby and turning toward Nathan. "Just make sure to support his head," Lisa said, noticing the stiffness in Nathan's posture. and maybe hold him a little closer. Nathan's awkwardness was palpable. He held Lucas as if handling something impossibly fragile. Lucas merely squinted at him, then suddenly reached out and grabbed the cuff of Nathan's sleeve. The tiny, soft grip froze Nathan in place for a moment, catching him off guard. Lisa smiled at the interaction. Lucas is a very calm baby. He rarely cries as long as he's being held. Nathan gave a curt nod, unsure how to respond. This baby Lucas was the most foreign thing he had ever encountered. In his world, he could handle tense negotiations, oversee hundreds of employees, and navigate crises with a single meeting. But standing here, holding this tiny, fragile life, he felt completely unprepared. Lisa stepped to a nearby desk, setting down a folder. Here are the documents for temporary custody. We've also scheduled the DNA test for tomorrow. Nathan carefully placed Lucas back into the crib, feeling like he had just completed a monumental task. He sat down and flipped through the pages of paperwork, his eyes scanning the terms while his mind raced elsewhere. I don't know the first thing about taking care of a baby, Nathan admitted, his voice low but honest. Lisa offered him a reassuring smile. No one really does at first, Mr. Hayes, but this little one needs you, at least for now, and you can start with the smallest steps. Nathan sighed, signing the documents. A soft coo from Lucas drew his attention, and he turned to see the baby staring at him, bright-eyed and trusting. As they left the center, Lucas was secured in a car seat, quiet, as if he understood this was the beginning of something new. Nathan glanced at him in the rearview mirror as they drove toward his penthouse. It's just temporary, Nathan told himself, as if to solidify the thought. But deep down, he knew that from the moment Lucas had grabbed his hand, everything had already changed. Nathan Hayes stepped into his immaculate penthouse, a space defined by sharp lines, pristine surfaces, and an air of calculated perfection. Everything was in its place. Except now, there was a baby. As he set Lucas's car seat gently on the floor, the entire apartment suddenly felt out of sync. From the abstract art on the walls to the polished hardwood floors, nothing about this place said home, let alone child-friendly. Nathan stared at Lucas, still sound asleep in his car seat, his tiny chest rising and falling. The peaceful sight made Nathan uneasy. Grabbing his phone, he called his assistant, Emma. "Emma, I need you to handle something immediately," Nathan said, his tone clipped. "A crib, formula, diapers, whatever babies need, and find a childcare expert." Emma, used to Nathan's abrupt requests, simply asked, "Do you need this tonight?" "As soon as possible," Nathan replied, hanging up before she could ask further questions. Nathan tried to follow Lisa's instructions, but caring for Lucas was far more difficult than he had anticipated. When Lucas woke up and began crying, Nathan awkwardly picked him up, but the cries only grew louder. He hurried to the kitchen to prepare a bottle, fumbling with the formula and spilling half the container on the counter. "How do people do this every single day?" he muttered under his breath, glancing at Lucas with a mix of frustration and exhaustion. When he finally placed the bottle in Lucas's mouth, the crying stopped, replaced by the quiet, rhythmic sound of Lucas drinking. Nathan exhaled deeply, relief washing over him, but the tension in his shoulders remained. For the first time in his life, something so small and fragile had completely upended his sense of control. That night, Nathan sat on his leather couch, his eyes fixed on the newly assembled crib that Emma had arranged to be delivered. Lucas slept soundly inside, his tiny features illuminated by the soft glow of a nearby lamp. Nathan couldn't take his eyes off him. He thought about the responsibility he had reluctantly taken on, and memories of Amelia crept into his mind. "This little guy," Nathan murmured, feeling something unfamiliar stir within him, an emotion he couldn't quite name. Suddenly, Lucas woke up and began crying loudly. Nathan got up immediately, lifting the baby into his arms and pacing the room to soothe him. The cries gradually subsided as Lucas rested his head against Nathan's shoulder. In that moment, for the first time, Nathan wasn't thinking about work or obligation. He simply felt connected. 2 days after Nathan began caring for Lucas, Amelia Scott appeared unexpectedly at the door of his penthouse. Nathan had just put Lucas down for a nap after another sleepless night when the doorbell rang. He frowned, wondering who would come at this hour. When he opened the door and saw Amelia standing there, time seemed to freeze. She looked nothing like the vibrant woman he remembered. Her face was weary, her eyes hollow and filled with anxiety. Yet there was something familiar about her presence that he couldn't ignore. "Nathan," she said softly, her voice trembling. "Amelia," he replied, his tone icy. "I thought you disappeared from my life for good." Amelia took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I need to see Lucas." Nathan stepped aside, letting her in. He motioned toward the living room where Lucas's crib stood neatly in the corner. Amelia hesitated, then walked over, her gaze softening as she saw Lucas sleeping peacefully. A faint smile crossed her lips, only to be replaced by an expression of guilt. Nathan folded his arms, standing behind her with a sharp, unforgiving gaze. "Why are you here, Amelia? You left a child and now you show up as if nothing happened." Amelia turned to face him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I didn't want to leave Lucas forever. But I couldn't do it, Nathan. I couldn't raise him on my own. I tried, but you chose to abandon him," Nathan cut in, his voice filled with restrained anger. "And now you expect, what, forgiveness? For me to act like this is fine?" Amelia clenched her fists, her voice breaking. "Do you think I wanted this? I had no choice. I tried to call you. I left messages, emails, everything, but you never responded." Nathan paused. He remembered the endless days of back-to-back meetings, ignoring anything unrelated to business. A pang of discomfort rose within him, though he refused to acknowledge it. "So you decided to put my name down and dump the mess on me?" he asked coldly. Amelia met his gaze directly. "I put your name down because I trusted you, Nathan, because I knew that no matter how much you hated me, you wouldn't let Lucas suffer." Nathan remained silent, his eyes flicking to Lucas, still sleeping soundly. He wanted to lash out at Amelia, to hold her accountable for the chaos she'd caused, but her raw sincerity stopped him. "What do you want, Amelia?" he finally asked, his voice low and controlled. "I just want to know that Lucas is okay," she replied, her voice trembling. "And if you'll allow it, I want to be part of his life." Nathan didn't respond immediately. He turned away, staring out the window. "Lucas is fine, but I don't know if I can trust you again." Amelia didn't argue. She simply stood there, waiting for whatever decision he would make. "We'll see about this," Nathan said after a long pause, "but don't expect me to forgive you easily." Amelia nodded, a glimmer of hope returning to her eyes. 2 days after Amelia's return, Nathan received a call from the lab. He was at his office, with Lucas lying in a small bassinet beside his desk. Bringing Lucas to work had been his only option. He didn't trust anyone else to take care of the baby. When his phone rang, Nathan picked it up immediately. "Mr. Hayes, the DNA results are in," the doctor's voice came through. Nathan took a deep breath, his eyes flicking to Lucas, peacefully sleeping in the bassinet. "And?" There was a brief pause before the doctor continued. "Lucas is not biologically your son." The words hit Nathan like a punch to the chest. He froze, his hand tightening around the phone. "Thank you," he said quietly, before ending the call. Nathan looked at Lucas, the tiny boy wrapped snugly in his blanket, oblivious to the truth that had just been revealed. Nathan questioned everything, the sleepless nights, the tender moments, and the growing bond between them. Did it all mean nothing if Lucas wasn't his son by blood? As if sensing his turmoil, Lucas stirred and opened his eyes. He reached out a tiny hand, grasping at the air. Nathan leaned in, letting the baby's fingers curl around his thumb. The DNA results couldn't change that moment. That day, Lucas's presence at the office caused more than a few complications. During an important meeting, Lucas began to cry, breaking the room's focus. Nathan excused himself, leaving the boardroom to soothe the baby in the hallway. Walking back and forth with Lucas in his arms, Nathan felt a strange calm wash over him as Lucas finally quieted, resting his head on Nathan's shoulder. Emma approached, holding a bottle she had quickly prepared. "Sir," she said softly, a rare smile on her face. "This office isn't exactly ideal for a baby, but I have to say, he fits right in with you." Nathan glanced at her, saying nothing, his gaze returning to Lucas. That evening, Nathan called Amelia to discuss the DNA results. When she arrived, his expression was cold, his tone clipped. "The results are in," Nathan said. "Lucas isn't my son." Amelia froze, her eyes filling with tears. I knew that was a possibility, but I wasn't sure, and I had no one else to turn to. You lied to me, Amelia, Nathan said, his voice hard. You made me believe he was mine. Amelia met his gaze, tears streaming down her face. I didn't do it to deceive you, Nathan. I did it because I didn't know what else to do. Lucas needed you, and I knew no matter how much you hated me, you wouldn't let him suffer. Nathan turned away, his emotions in turmoil. What do you expect me to do now? Amelia's voice trembled. I expect you to admit that you care for him, not because of blood, but because he's already your son in every way that matters. After Amelia left, Nathan sat beside Lucas, watching him sleep. The memories came flooding back. Lucas's laughter, his tiny hand clutching Nathan's finger, the nights spent rocking him to sleep. The DNA test couldn't erase those moments. The next morning, Nathan called Amelia. I don't care about the DNA test, he said. Lucas might not be my son by blood, but he's my son in every way that counts. I'm not walking away from him. After Nathan decided to care for Lucas despite the DNA results, he quickly realized that taking on the responsibility alone was far more challenging than he had anticipated. Lucas required constant care and attention, and Nathan couldn't manage both work and fatherhood without compromising one or the other. One evening, as Amelia visited Lucas, Nathan sat across from her in the living room, his expression thoughtful and slightly hesitant. Amelia, he began carefully, I think Lucas needs more than what I can provide on my own. If you move in here, he'll have a more stable environment. Amelia looked at him in shock, her eyebrows lifting. Are you serious? Living together with me? Nathan nodded, his tone steady. This isn't about us, it's about Lucas. He needs both of us to give him the best chance at a normal, happy life. Amelia hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. After a moment of silence, she looked back up and said softly, Okay, but I need you to understand, I'm doing this for Lucas, not for us. That's all I need, Nathan replied, a faint but genuine smile crossing his face. Amelia moved in that weekend, arriving with a few bags and essential items for Lucas. Despite their agreement, the atmosphere between them was tense at first. She chose a small room near Lucas's nursery, politely declining Nathan's offer of a larger room. This is enough for me, she said with a small, polite smile. Nathan simply nodded, allowing her to settle in on her own terms. Their differences quickly became apparent. Nathan, still clinging to his precise, structured habits, maintained a rigid daily schedule, waking up early, preparing for work, and sticking to his calendar. Meanwhile, Amelia's approach to caring for Lucas was more intuitive and flexible, adapting to the baby's needs as they arose. One morning, as Nathan was preparing to leave for the office, Lucas began crying loudly. Amelia was busy tidying up in the kitchen and called out, Nathan, could you hold him for a second? Nathan froze mid-step, looking over at the crib. He hesitated before walking over, lifting Lucas awkwardly. Why is he crying? Nathan asked, his voice tense. Amelia peeked into the room, smiling at his awkwardness. Maybe he just wants his dad to hold him for a bit. Over time, the small, everyday challenges of raising Lucas brought Nathan and Amelia closer together. One evening, Lucas was unusually fussy due to teething pains. Both Nathan and Amelia were exhausted from taking turns holding and soothing him. Amelia collapsed onto the couch with Lucas in her arms, her eyes heavy with fatigue. We're really bad at this, she said with a weak laugh. Nathan sat beside her, rubbing his temples. I used to think running a company was the hardest thing in the world, but this is much harder, Amelia finished for him, chuckling softly. Lucas, sensing the calmness of his parents, finally drifted off to sleep in Amelia's arms. Amelia's presence not only eased Nathan's workload, but also began to change him in ways he hadn't expected. He found himself spending less time buried in emails and more time engaging with Lucas. One morning, Amelia walked into the living room and found Nathan sitting on the floor playing with Lucas. The baby was giggling uncontrollably as Nathan held up a stuffed toy. Don't tell me this is the same Nathan Hayes I used to know, Amelia teased, leaning against the doorway with a smile. Nathan glanced up at her, a rare softness in his eyes. Maybe Lucas has changed me more than I realized. One sunny afternoon, The three of them took a walk in the park. Nathan carried Lucas on his shoulders, the baby's eyes wide with wonder as he took in the world around him. Amelia walked beside them, occasionally adjusting Lucas's tiny jacket to keep him warm. Nathan looked at Lucas, then glanced at Amelia. "This little boy? He means everything to me," he said softly. Amelia nodded, her eyes reflecting the same sentiment. "And to him, you're everything." That evening, after putting Lucas to bed, Nathan stood by the crib, watching his son sleep peacefully. Amelia joined him, standing quietly by his side. "What are you thinking?" she asked gently. Nathan didn't turn to look at her. Instead, he kept his eyes on Lucas and said, "I think Lucas is the best thing that's ever happened to me." Amelia smiled, stepping a little closer. They stood side by side, saying nothing more, but both knowing that, despite their imperfect past, they were building something real together. A family bound by love and commitment.